This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
A declassified document cited in Back Channel to Cuba offers a window into the first formal negotiating session to explore normalized relations between the United States and Cuba. We spend the rest of the hour with the authors of a new book that exposes the secret history of dialogue between the United States and Cuba. Much of the book relies on recently declassified top-secret documents. Among the revelations are details of how then U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger considered launching airstrikes against Cuba after Fidel Castro sent troops to support independence fighters in Angola in 1976. In the years that followed, top-secret U.S. emissaries, including former President Jimmy Carter and Nobel Prize-winning author Gabriel Garcia Marquez, worked to normalize relations with Cuba. The book's release comes as Cuban leader Raul Castro is set to participate for the first time in next year's Summit of the Americas in Panama. Earlier this month, Panama's foreign minister flew to Havana to personally invite Castro to attend for the first time. President Obama has not yet said if he will attend the talks.
Meanwhile, Cuba has denounced the Obama administration for extending the more than 50-year embargo. The White House authorized the trade embargo for another year in a little-notice move in September. Speaking before the UN General Assembly, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez said U.S. restrictions on Cuba have worsened under President Obama.
The State Department has again included Cuba in its unilateral and arbitrary list of states that sponsor international terrorism. Its true purpose is to increase the persecution of our international financial transactions in the whole world and justify the blockade policy. Under the present administration, there has been an unprecedented tightening of extraterritorial character of the blockade, with a remarkable and unheard-of emphasis on financial transactions through the imposition of multi-million fines on banking institutions of third countries.
Well, for more, we're joined by Peter Kornbluh and William Leo Grand, authors of the new book, Back Channel to Cuba, The Hidden History of Negotiations Between Washington and Havana. Peter Kornbluh directs the Cuba Documentation Project at the National Security Archive at George Washington University. And William Leo Grand is a professor of government at American University. You can read the introduction to their book on our website at democracynow.org. They also wrote an article, which is now on the Nation's website, headlined 6 Lessons for Obama on How to Improve Relations with Cuba. The president knows U.S. policy has been a failure. Here's how he can make a breakthrough in the little time he has left. Well, we'll get to that. But William Leo Grand and Peter Kornbluh, welcome back to Democracy Now! Peter, I want to start with you and the documents that you've got that have never been revealed before, once again showing how close the U.S. came, that U.S. leaders were willing to risk world peace in going after Cuba. Talk about Henry Kissinger.
Henry Kissinger deserves much credit for actually taking the initiative to reach out to Fidel Castro through a secret emissary, sending him a handwritten note saying, we should try and improve relations and let's set up a secret mechanism to start talks. That was in the summer of 1974. And a series of talks did take place, culminating in an extraordinary 3-hour meeting at the Pierre Hotel here in New York City in July of 1975. But you know, the United States has always wanted Cuba to compromise either its foreign policy or its domestic policy to come to terms with the United States. And Fidel Castro had a request from Agustin Nieto in Angola for support against CIA-supported right-wing guerrillas challenging his MPLA movement. Castro sent troops into Angola. Kissinger was irate that a pipsqueak, as he kept calling Fidel Castro in meetings with Gerald Ford, would actually project military power into another continent and thwart Kissinger's kind of chessboard design of the Cold War on that continent. And he ordered up these contingency plans, which are now in the news and posted on the website of the National Security Archive. Our book, Back Channel to Cuba, broke this story. of these documents, they were pretty powerful. Contingency plans for airstrikes, mining of the harbors of Cuba, a naval blockade perhaps. In the Oval Office, he said to Gerald Ford, I think we're going to have to smash Cuba, get them out of Africa. We might have to wait till after the 1976 elections. Of course, Gerald Ford fortunately lost the 1976 elections.
And Carter came in and talked about what happened to those plans.
Well, Carter certainly did not pick up on those plans at all. He had a completely different perspective of dealing with Cuba and all sorts of other countries with which we did not have close relations, which we had hostile relations. In fact, he told Bill Leogrand and I when we interviewed him that he had a broader approach, civil dialogue, even positive relations with enemy states was much preferable to military hostilities. And so he also attempted, picked up on kind of where Kissinger had dropped the issue of trying to normalize relations and engaged in a series of secret meetings and talks with the Cubans as well, which are detailed rather extensively in this book.
Well, William Leogrand, can you talk about where you got access to these documents? Why were they declassified now? How long did it take for you to get access to them? And how much are we talking about? How many documents did you get access to?
Well, I think over the course of doing the research for this book, we looked literally at hundreds and hundreds of declassified documents. A lot of them were declassified as a result of Peter's work at the National Security Archive, because the archive has really been a leader in forcing the United States government to declassify things that it'd prefer not to through the Freedom of Information Act. These particular documents and some ones that really were just released a few weeks ago continue to document this hidden history. We're all very familiar with the 50 years, 55 years now of hostility between Cuba and the United States. What most people don't know is that every president since Eisenhower has negotiated with Cuba about one issue or another. During the Kissinger and Carter years, it was about normalization of relations. In other years, it's been about smaller issues, but no less important ones, like finding peace in southern Africa. And we were determined to unearth that history, and getting these documents was the key link for being able to do that.
And how many times did the Cuban government take the initiative to open a dialogue with the U.S. in the same period of time that you looked at?
What's really fascinating is that the Cubans repeatedly took the initiative to try to improve relations. Essentially, every time a new U.S. presidential administration came into office, Fidel Castro would make some sort of initiative. Sometimes it was private, through private emissaries. Sometimes it was very public, in 1964, for example. The Cubans just repeatedly made an effort, which suggested to us that, in fact, the Cubans were really interested in trying to normalize the relationship with the United States, but not on any terms. As Peter said, Cuba has its own foreign policy, has its own domestic arrangements, and has never been willing to make major concessions in its foreign policy or in its domestic social and political organization for better relations with the United States.
Your chronicling of the negotiations that were taking place, even people in this country don't realize the number, the hundreds of attempts on Castro's life. And you told this interesting story of a U.S. negotiator for the United States, Joe Donovan, on the one hand negotiating, and then he's being undermined by the CIA. Explain this story to bring a gift to Castro that will kill him.
Yes, we talk about this story literally on the very first page of the book. James Donovan was a New York lawyer, very famous for organizing a prisoner swap with the Soviet Union. And John F. Kennedy picked him to first win the liberation of the Bay of Pigs prisoners, over 1,000 prisoners and their families. And then the CIA sent him back to kind of win the release of 3 CIA agents that Fidel had in his jails and arrange a prisoner swap there. And he was doing confidence-building work with Castro. He was doing shuttle diplomacy back and forth from Miami, and he brought him all sorts of little gifts, including a wetsuit, a scuba diving suit, and a watch, and a snorkel, etc. And when one branch of the CIA, the Executive Action Branch, which was the euphemism for the assassination branch of the CIA, found out that he was going to be bringing this wetsuit. They concocted this plan to poison it. They had a particular poison for the snorkel, a different poison.
They were going to put tuberculosis in the snorkel?
Yeah, they were going to put tuberculosis in the snorkel, I believe, and a special fungus in the wetsuit. And Donovan had these handlers at the CIA who liked him and who were positive about him, A, negotiating the release of their fellow CIA guys who were in prison, and B, you know, possibly actually making progress on better relations with Cuba. And they basically said to him, we're going to keep control of this wetsuit in our possession so that other people in the CIA never get it and can't contaminate it. And, you know, that was an opening story to show that the tug of war between some people over the course of these years in the U.S. government who really were focused on improving relations, and the kind of hardliners who all they wanted to do was either assassinate Fidel Castro, start a counter-revolution in Cuba, and you know, basically bring the force of the United States down upon the Cuban Revolution.
We're going to break and then come back to just a list of the times, the attempts at negotiation, and what was this tremendous force that prevented the opening of relations between Cuba and the United States, and your recommendations for President Obama. We're speaking with Peter Kornblue and William Leo Grand. Their new book is Back Channel to Cuba, The Hidden History of Negotiations Between Washington and Havana.